I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 99 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, November 29, 2022. The committee is resuming its study of Canada's electricity grid and network. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of all. Before we begin, I would like to ask members and others participating in person to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. These cards. Please take note of the following preventative measures in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Only use a black approved earpiece. The former gray earpieces must no longer be used. Keep your earpiece away from all microphones at all times. When you are not using your earpiece, place it down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Thank you all for your cooperation. Zoom reminders, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of this meeting. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the study today. First, from ATCO, Dale Friesen, Senior Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Chief Government Affairs Officer. From the Canadian Gas Association, Timothy Egan, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the Canadian Nuclear Association, John Gorman, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, Vittoria Bellissimo, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. From Electricity Canada, Francis Bradley, President and Chief Executive Officer. From Electro Federation Canada, Carol McLogan, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Frederick Morency, Vice President, Sustainability, Strategic Initiatives and Innovation. We have up to 5 minutes each will be given for opening remarks, and after that, we will proceed with the rounds of questions. I will be using these yellow and red cards. Yellow is a 30-second warning. Red is time's up, and I'll let you finish if you're mid-sentence and complete your sentence. We will begin with Mr. Friesen from ATCO. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Merci, President.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, esteemed members of Parliament and fellow panelists. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. For more than 75 years, ATCO has delivered electricity to hundreds of communities and millions of people in Canada and around the world. Today, we operate electric utilities in Alberta, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, as well as Puerto Rico. We also own more than 700 megawatts of power generation, approximately of which 500 megawatts is derived from wind and solar projects, with a development portfolio of more than 1.5 gigawatts in future renewable projects. In sum, we have a uniquely holistic view of the electricity sector in Canada, from wind turbines and solar panels to transmission and distribution lines, all the way to meters at our customers' homes. It is this perspective that I'd like to frame my remarks this afternoon. The first priority for us is to prioritize affordability and reliability. I want to begin by stressing the importance of maintaining reliability and affordability as the grid evolves. In each jurisdiction that we serve, these topics are front and center in the mind of our customers. In Alberta, volatile electricity prices, as well as the cost of new distribution and transmission infrastructure, are of paramount concern. These issues are anticipated to grow as gas-fired generation retires and as renewable capacity is added to the grid, which will require new transmission infrastructure. Meanwhile, in our Yukon service territory, the rapid uptake of distributed energy resources, which we are a part of and support, has resulted in unintended consequences for power quality. Specifically, last spring, we recorded 6 events where fluctuations in solar output paired with inadequate system inertia, resulted in sudden load increases that put grid stability at risk. These are things that we are working with the provincial governments and the territorial governments and system operators to address these challenges, but they highlight the sometimes unintended consequence to customers associated with the rapidly decarbonizing grid. Over 90% of the renewable projects that were added in Canada last year were in Alberta. Number 2, accelerate climate adaptation. While we're focused on maintaining affordability and reliability, we're collectively facing an increased number of climate-related events. The vast and remote nature of our service territories in Alberta, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon require enhanced planning to maintain system integrity in the face of changing climate. In recent years, we've seen an increase in both the frequency and duration of outages in our system, due in part to damage from weather-related events. We're investing in climate adaptation and resilience, such as improving the materials and standards that we use for our distribution and transmission poles, and selectively undergrounding wires where possible. Another thing that was very helpful is just the wrapping of power poles. The base up to about 3 meters has provided a lot more resistance from wildfires as well. So these things can make a difference. However, these climate adaptation measures often require significant upfront investments and can lead to higher electricity rates. Finding a sustainable balance between a resilience and affordability will be crucial for all electric utilities in Canada and need to be considered by policymakers as the additional pressures facing our systems. Thirdly and lastly, policy certainty. These reliability and resilience challenges are complicated by challenges with policy and regulation. We remained concerned that the proposed clean electricity regulations may result in big impacts to reliability and affordability and potentially to public safety for customers. The latest considerations regarding the CER framework appear to provide some flexibility. However, without clear numbers, it's just impossible to determine what their cumulative impacts are at this time. We're also awaiting progress on federal permitting reform. To reach our net zero goals by 2050, we require dramatic acceleration provincially and federally in the permitting and construction of electricity infrastructure. Expediting permitting for net zero generation is important, but equally expediting permitting for transmission lines is critical, including interties and connections to remote Indigenous communities. In Canada, it can take up to a decade or more to build a high voltage line, and many of these projects will be built simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friesen. We'll now go to Mr. Timothy Egan from the Canadian Gas Association for 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Minister of Natural Resources, speaking to my board of directors a few years ago, said, wouldn't it be great if we had a national electricity link coast to coast? And I said to him, Minister, we have one in the Trans-Canada Mainline. The Mainline, of course, is one of several extraordinary pipeline networks across the continent. The TC Energy system, of which it is a part, and the Enbridge system are two massive infrastructure networks owned by Canadian pipeline companies, linking millions of North Americans to the energy they need for a range of services. And there are numerous other systems as well. But my response wasn't the one the minister wanted, and dare I say it's because he, like many Canadians, too often engages in an electricity conversation as though electricity alone can meet all of Canada's energy demands, and as though electricity isn't dependent on the broader energy system. But of course this isn't true. Electricity is a technology, not an energy source, and it uses a variety of energy sources. We need electrons to run a bunch of things, but that's because they enable other technologies. But we need those energy sources to make electrons. And I'm going to talk for a few moments today about one of those sources, natural gas, and how essential it is to the electricity system and indeed the well-being of the country as a whole. Canada's natural gas infrastructure is extensive, with over 600,000 kilometres of pipelines delivering energy to two-thirds of Canadians, and storage facilities across the country within that system, altogether meeting nearly 40% of Canada's energy needs, more than double the contribution of electricity. This extensive infrastructure and storage capacity allows the delivery of large volumes of energy reliably, especially during peak demand periods or emergencies, and this includes electric energy. Already a key part of the power generation mix in many provinces, Natural gas-fired electricity has increased by an average of 4% every year since 2018, at a time when we are contemplating serious constraints in the power system. The reliability of the gas system and why that matters to the electric system is underscored by events like the polar vortex of January this year, when natural gas delivered the equivalent energy of 110,000 megawatts of power, or nearly 10 times the record electric peak in Alberta. Approximately 50% of that came from natural gas in storage, a battery of unparalleled scale. In other words, demand went through the roof and the natural gas tap could be turned on to ensure reliable energy for heating needs, as well as reliable electricity. Without it, the electrical system would have failed. I mentioned the draw on storage during Alberta's cold snap, because that storage strength exists there, but also across the country. The Dawn Storage Hub in Ontario is one of the largest integrated storage facilities in North America. It's a massive battery of over 285 billion cubic feet of natural gas, or the equivalent of roughly 1/10 of the total gas used in the country in a year. There's no comparable battery storage, and the hub provides unmatched flexibility and reliability for our energy system, critical especially in winter, when estimates suggest the heating load met by natural gas would require the equivalent of as many as 90 nuclear plants. Still in Ontario, the Independent Electric System Operator understands the value of natural gas. The organization anticipates a shortfall of electricity by the late 2020s and has identified natural gas and renewable energy sources that are backed by natural gas as essential to meet the need. From an affordability perspective, natural gas is unparalleled. In 2023, the delivered cost of electricity was more than 3 times that of natural gas. That's even with carbon taxes. And electricity prices are rising. In British Columbia, an announced annual increase of 6.4%, in Nova Scotia 6.5%, and Newfoundland 10.5%. Energy affordability affects the overall cost of living, not just because of the price of energy for direct use, as electricity, or fuel for transportation, or energy for heating, but also because the cost of energy affects the cost of absolutely everything else we need. The growing threat to affordable energy, something Canadians have always taken for granted, is leading to a growing reality of energy poverty, something we should never have to contemplate in a country so rich with energy resources. Natural gas is the most cost-effective energy source available to Canadians. The average cost of delivering energy through natural gas infrastructure is roughly $68 per megawatt hour compared to over $560 per megawatt hour for electricity. And this cost effectiveness makes natural gas a vital component of our energy strategy, helping to keep energy costs affordable. And thirdly and finally, natural gas is an acceptable energy source that aligns with Canadians' interests and concerns. Its environmental footprint is small and steadily being reduced as the industry continually innovates and invests in emission management techniques, efficiency improvements, and new fuels like hydrogen and RNG. Its infrastructure is inobtrusive and is overwhelmingly underground. Its safety record is exemplary. Millions rely on it and don't want to stop using it. And to conclude, Mr. Chairman, I speak to remind all of the great asset we have in our natural gas resource and our natural gas infrastructure. We are foundational to the overall energy system, and those who call for our elimination do so without reflection on the enormous risk this represents to the well-being of Canadians and even to the very electrical system such advocates seek to expand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. We'll now go to the Canadian Nuclear Association, Mr. John Gorman. You have 5 minutes.
Merci. J'aimerais vous remercier.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for having given us the opportunity to appear before you today.
Fundamental to the well-being of Canada and Canadians, and the role it plays in our lives and our economy is set to grow dramatically over the coming years and decades. Ensuring reliability and sustainability of the grid through this growth and demand is of paramount importance. But the strength and reliability of the grid is tied directly to the strength and reliability of the electricity that gives it power. For approximately 15% of the nation's electricity grid and 60% of the grid here in Ontario, that strength is nuclear. But the strength and reliability, I'm here today on behalf of the Canadian nuclear industry representing over 80,000 Canadians in exploring and mining uranium, generating electricity, advancing nuclear medicine, and promoting Canada's leadership worldwide in science and technological innovation. Canada's nuclear technologies, which include large conventional reactors like the CANDU, one of our country's proudest technological achievements and exports, and newer small modular reactors, or SMRs, will play an increasingly important role in ensuring reliable and affordable power supply as increasing electrification puts pressure on both large and small grids, including remote communities. Looking into the future, industry studies suggest that electrification of the Canadian economy by 2050, while meeting net zero emission goals, will require at a very minimum an additional 100 gigawatts of clean baseload electricity generation. That does not include significant amounts of renewables that need to be brought on to help this transition. Provincial and territorial governments are actively considering how a suite of technologies could be allocated to meet this massive demand load. Nuclear is increasingly being considered as the best solution. Following the Memorandum of Understanding between the provinces of Ontario, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, SMR projects in each province have established a critical first-mover advantage, opening opportunities to develop a pan-Canadian new nuclear technology supply chain. Current large CANDU nuclear electricity generating plants in Ontario and New Brunswick have been demonstrating for generations how important nuclear energy is meeting the energy needs of industry and of Canadians. The $26 billion refurbishment initiative undertaken by Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power, Canada's largest infrastructure project, is on time and on budget. Our nuclear fleet is the envy of many countries around the world who are struggling to find a plan to net zero. As a Tier 1 nuclear nation with a proven track record with its CANDU reactors, CANDU has the experience, knowledge, and resources to develop new nuclear technologies such as SMRs, and indeed we are doing so. In addition to accelerating the clean energy transition, SMR development in Canada also addresses needs beyond electricity. SMRs can also be used to create non-emitting fuels like hydrogen for transportation, industry, and export. The Government of Canada has shown clear support for the Canadian nuclear industry through a range of policy and financial commitments. However, for Canada to succeed in its ambitious decarbonization and electrification goals, much more needs to be done. Moving forward, in order to ensure a strong nuclear energy sector, the Canadian Nuclear Association recommends the following key points to build on the success to date, as well as meeting climate and energy security goals that will also facilitate regional, provincial, and local grid stability. First, on regulatory alignment, we recommend the government continues to develop an efficient regulatory regime in Canada that recognizes the need for significant acceleration of the development and deployment of clean energy infrastructure, including nuclear large and small. Second, on the nuclear supply chain, we recommend taking a continental approach and recognize that working with the United States is to our mutual benefit. This includes key issues such as uranium and nuclear fuel access, especially for SMR development. Finally, regarding financing, we recommend continued investment in both large and small reactor technologies. We recommend that the investment tax credit, the ITCs, designed for nuclear technologies and supply chain, be undertaken in a timely fashion to match efforts undertaken by the United States, and for ITC Bill C-59 to include an SMR definition as to ensure the technologies are eligible to ensure timely deployment of technologies. Members of the committee, we're a country built on our abundant natural resources and skilled, passionate workforce. Our path to success in the energy transition rests not outside our borders, but here at home, with those sectors we are proud to call our own. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. We'll now go to the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, Vittoria Bellissimo, by video conference. Yes.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you and this committee for inviting me to testify on behalf of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, CanREA, as part of this committee's study of Canada's electricity grid and network. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Métis Nation, who call this region home. CanREA is the voice for the wind energy, solar energy, and energy storage solutions that will power Canada's energy future. Our 300-plus members are uniquely positioned to deliver clean, low-cost, reliable, flexible, and scalable solutions for Canada's energy needs, which are set to grow faster than ever. Canadians consumed approximately 640 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2022. Over 60% hydro, 17.5% from fossil fuels, 13% nuclear, and notably 5.7% wind, 1.5% biofuels, and 1.1% solar PV. Environment and Climate Change Canada estimates that reaching net zero will require a doubling or tripling of Canada's generation capacity by 2050 as Canadians switch from fossil fuels to clean electricity to meet their everyday energy needs. This growth in generation will require significant investment in renewable energy and energy storage. Meeting Canada's climate targets is not the only reason to invest in renewable energy and energy storage. Staying competitive in a rapidly digitizing global economy depends on Canada generating more electricity. The International Energy Agency notes that the electricity consumption from data centers, artificial intelligence, and the cryptocurrency sector could more than double by 2026, going from a global consumption of 460 terawatt hours in 2022 to more than 1,000 terawatt hours in 2026. With companies opening 20-plus megawatt facilities across Canada, the demand for power for computing is rising. CanREA members are ready to meet the growing demand resulting from Canada's climate goals and the needs of the future economy. They have proven that they can build new large-scale generation projects in 2 to 5 years and do so at a cost that keeps electricity affordable for Canadians. Competing technologies may require a decade, if not more. Investments are happening now, with Ontario announcing last week the procurement of 1,784 megawatts of energy storage from 10 projects, which will be online by 2028. In total, Ontario will have up to 2,916 megawatts of energy storage capacity over 26 facilities before 2030. This is a story that will be repeated across Canada as provincial utilities and system operators launch calls for new electricity from renewables and energy storage. Renewable electricity and energy storage projects can be further accelerated by the Clean Technology Investment Tax Credit, ITC, and the forthcoming Clean Electricity, ITC. The relatively straightforward design and refundability of the ITCs will put the country in a competitive position relative to the U.S. and other jurisdictions that are looking to decarbonize their electricity systems. Companies looking to invest in renewable energy also have stated that the fact that the Clean Technology ITC, once passed, will be available until 2034 gives them confidence that Canada will remain competitive in the long term. That said, CanREA members, including capital providers, have made it clear that without these ITCs, they will look to invest in the US, EU, or other markets where a path to profitability is clearer. In a world where the demand is growing significantly, projects and capital will go to the jurisdictions of lowest risk and highest return. As such, I urge all parliamentarians to pass Bill C-59 as soon as possible. I also encourage the government to introduce the enabling legislation for the Clean Electricity ITC before the House rises for the summer. We are particularly optimistic about the opportunities that the Clean Technology Investment Tax Credit will create. This measure will allow companies investing in a variety of low-carbon technologies to recoup between 20 and 30% of their project capital costs as a refundable tax credit. When the enabling legislation for this investment tax credit is passed, it will rapidly accelerate the deployment of technologies like battery energy storage systems, wind and solar across Canada by strengthening the economics of renewable energy projects and attracting capital to the sector. This is about acceleration and international competitiveness and keeping electricity affordable for Canadian ratepayers. Thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bellissimo. We'll now go to Electricity Canada. Mr. Francis Bradley, you have 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm the CEO of Electricity Canada. And we are the national voice of electricity industry. Our members generate, transmit, and distribute electricity in all provinces and territories.
Impacts all social, environmental, and economic facets of life. Whether it be keeping the lights on, driving down emissions in other sectors, or powering one of the largest economies in the world, Canadian electricity is foundational to it all. Since 2005, our sector has cut emissions by more than half, making Canada's electricity grid over 84% non-emitting, among the cleanest in the world. We will continue to see emissions reductions as our members adopt and integrate new technologies. Canada, like elsewhere in the world, is experiencing a rapid increase in electricity demand. And this is driven by several factors, including the rise of new technologies like electric vehicles and artificial intelligence, as well as broader efforts to decarbonize the economy. We expect demand to double or triple by 2050. Now, to meet this demand, we're going to have to expand the system at a pace we haven't seen in decades. This must be done in a country with multiple electricity grids made up of different resource mixes, market structures, and regulatory environments. Because of this regional variance, there will be no silver bullet technology or a one-size-fits-all approach to growth. The investment tax credit regime is foundational to promoting clean energy competitiveness while supporting rate affordability. The Indigenous loan guarantees and the SREPS programs will also help address important gaps. But nonetheless, our industry faces significant challenges. Doubling or tripling the size of the grid while reducing emissions too quickly may jeopardize affordability and reliability. We must ensure that emphasis on reducing further emissions faster does not compromise our ability to maintain the integrity of the electricity system in each region. We must also remain competitive in the global marketplace. Although the CCUS and clean technology ITCs are close, we aren't there yet. And meanwhile, the U.S. is seeing record clean energy investments since the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. We need investment certainty if Canada is to keep pace. And finally, we need to build faster. Current permitting and approval timelines do not reflect the urgency that is needed to meet demand. So to address these challenges and support an affordable, reliable, and clean industry, we have three key recommendations. First, federal regulations like the CERs must be designed to ensure that affordability and reliability can be maintained. Each province's starting point is different, so it's important that national ambitions don't unintentionally leave provinces behind. Besides, as I said at the beginning, the electricity system is going to grow substantially in the coming decades. It's important that the system remain as flexible as possible so that we can meet this growing demand no matter what. The technologies that are meant to help us get there have yet to arrive in Canada at the scale that will be required. This makes it difficult to be certain on timelines for the phase-in of reliable replacement power. Second, to support bringing these technologies to market, the federal government should continue investing in the system. At the same time, more is needed to ensure communities and households are prepared to receive and manage the massive increase in load. Intra-provincial transmission and distribution will be crucial to supporting the growth of electric vehicles, of demand-side efficiency, and the connection of rural communities to clean electricity. And finally, our federal regulatory environment needs to be adapted to ensure these timelines and targets can be achieved. Work is needed to reduce duplication and promote clarity, transparency, and accountability within federal processes. So to conclude, I want to stress that significant growth in demand will come regardless of our climate objectives. And as an industry, we must be ready to meet this growth and to build for the future. Mr. Chair, merci beaucoup d'avoir
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to explain this to you.
Provided a detailed submission for the committee's consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. We'll now go to Electro Federation Canada. Carol McLogan, you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to you and the esteemed members of the committee for having myself and Mr. Morency here this afternoon. The study which you find yourselves currently undertaking will have big implications for the country and how we chart the path to net zero. We are grateful for your thoughtful deliberations to date and are excited to bring our insights to your conversation. Electro Federation Canada is an industry organization with 260 members that represent a thriving industry of electrical manufacturers, wholesale distributors, sales agents, and field service providers who design, develop, distribute, and install electrical and automation products that support energy efficiency and contribute to a net zero future. Our electrical and automation industry members are the technology makers, innovation experts, and supply chain partners for a net zero economy. We're powering a changing world. EFC members contribute over $15 billion to the Canadian economy annually and support 109,000 jobs directly and indirectly in more than 1,400 facilities nationwide. Though we have long been active in advancing these initiatives, it is only the last few years that we've trained a more intense focus on working with departments in Parliament here in Ottawa. Last year, in conjunction with the Pembina Institute, we published an industry white paper titled Decarbonizing Canada via Electrification that provided a roadmap of where we believe strategic investments and policies need to be made in order to achieve the ambitious targets laid out before us. Specific to this study, we made recommendations on investing in distribution system upgrades and a further emphasis on developing regional electricity interties. We also conducted 2 Hill Day exercises in February of 2023 and 24 respectively, where we met with parliamentarians of all stripes to discuss and raise these issues and recommendations, and have been encouraged by the reception that we've received to date. We note that the brief that Mr. Manveer Sandhu had submitted to the committee as part of this study and are aligned with those 4 recommendations regarding the development of a national electricity strategy, increasing interprovincial transmission capacity, modernizing and upgrading requisite infrastructure, and increasing decentralized energy capacity countrywide. In addition, we state that as all these substantive investments are being made, it is important to support the 4 recommendations with an industrial strategy that helps secure the global supply of energy transition solutions and promotes local manufacturing and supply chain building with investment tax credits to meet Canada's timelines to achieve a greener electrified Canada. To put the supply issue in context, the demand for switchgear and transformers are no longer driven by building starts alone. Solar, batteries and storage, and data centers are all competing for this technology. A study done by Scotiabank on the U.S. states that the demand for switchgear and transformers will increase by 5 times annually to meet the demand for the U.S. in the next 15 to 18 years. We know that a new mix of energy is required, and this impacts demand for components. For example, a 1,000 megawatt nuclear or gas plant will require 55 to 70 transformers each, whereas the comparable amount of output from wind or solar with 1,000 megawatt hours of on-site battery energy storage will require 900 to 1,250 transformers. At the same time, a large hyperscale data center needs 1,400 to 1,700 transformers per site. All of this is creating a tremendous demand for electrical equipment and electrical power generation. One of our 4 Canadian transformer manufacturers is committed to the grid and saving their capacity for utilities. However, they may have to face a business decision as the data center market is moving quicker and are willing to pay more for equivalent products. This competitive activity was also highlighted in the Scotiabank report. Today's lead time for transformers is over 2 years, and the lead time for switchgear has gone from 20 weeks to over 1 year. It is important to secure our Canadian supply for our energy security. We know that net zero is important for our environment and the next generation of Canadians. At the same time, the push to net zero is also good for the economy. Because of Canada's hard work in decarbonizing our grid, we have become an attractive destination for investment by companies that have made low-carbon commitments and see the economic value of a lesser emitting energy system. We are also seeing this investment create new jobs. This is a win-win for the environment and a win for the economy. We are in a global race, and our members can unlock capacity, secure supply chains, and provide technical assistance to get this job done efficiently for Canada. We're here to help, and we want to make a positive difference. Thank you for your time, and we eagerly welcome your questions about our work and initiatives.
Thank you for your opening remarks. We'll now proceed to our first round of questions, and we'll start with Ms. Stubbs for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today, for your candid and comprehensive dose of reality and painting a very accurate picture about the absolute inextricable link between your operations, your expertise, and the everyday essential needs of every Canadian in every community across this country, including your concern about affordability and Canadians being able to afford reliable, stable, predictable sources of power. Mr. Friesen, I just invite you to comment on what I understand to be a growing gap between supply and demand for the equipment and materials needed to grow the grid. And if you have any comments on supply chain issues with materials needed to build that out and meet expansion goals.
Sure. Thank you, Honourable Member. And I just want to shout out Carol for her great comments on some of the supply chain issues. And a few examples that we would use. I had the privilege before COP in Dubai last December to also speak at an Edison Electric Institute at the Gulf Corporation Council. And it was really fascinating to hear the supply chain challenges that are being faced around the world. Those that you've heard from Carol and from Francis, they're real. And there's something, one number that really grabbed me was that the entire capacity of the world production of transmission lines would be consumed for 2 years with just a 3,000 kilometer order for a transmission line globally. That would take up 2-year supply globally. And that was shocking. And I think the other thing is you drive into your neighborhood tonight and you look at those little transformers that hang on the power poles that Carol was talking about. I mean, they used to be almost off the shelf, but they're now up to 2-year lead items. And many of the suppliers are saying you either go single source or we don't want to talk to you. And so that impacts price, it impacts delivery, timing. And our stats show that in the States, they're estimating between 60 and 80% of these transformers that are existing will just need to be replaced as a matter of course in the coming between now and 2050. So these challenges are challenges that anybody in the business is facing. And I would add to that some of the labor challenges that are people this room is well aware of is another one of those challenges that is coming in parallel. So working with government, with industry, with schools is something that I think is very important as we go forward to try to ensure that we can meet those demands.
Thank you. Mr. Friesen and Mr. Bradley, and also to Mr. Egan, you all in different ways have commented on the reality about the different grids, the regional and provincial differences, which is, well, I would say that, the Prime Minister says that our strength is diversity, right? Well, that is very true on resources and electricity, although he seems to forget about that. I wonder if you might talk about the regional differences in the grid and also around this discussion of interties. In 2017, MP Falk and I were members of this committee, and a report was issued that recommended engagement with provinces and territories to identify and address regulatory barriers, to facilitate interties, interprovincial and Canada-US ones, and to modernize electric systems and markets. I would invite you each to expand further on the issues around the diversity of grids between regions and provinces, the status of interties, and also the policy barriers that exist to expand the grid and establish interties, and what your competing views on those might be.
I could certainly begin if you like. In terms of the diversity of the grids, it is certainly both a strength, but also a challenge, because there are such very massive differences, and it's a result, quite simply, as all of the members are well aware, of the different resource endowments in different areas of the country. So there are simply some areas in this country where there is a lot of falling water, and there are other parts of this country that happen to be very flat and don't have a lot of falling water. And so that results, of course, in some pretty significant challenges with respect to things like, and we mentioned the clean electricity regulations, that impact different areas and different parts of this country in very different ways, certainly. Would a greater interconnection and interties address this? Certainly partly. You know, when we look at different regions and the ability to lean on that, but again, it's much like I said earlier with respect to technologies, that even that greater interconnection between grids is not a silver bullet either to be able to address the challenges that we have amongst the different jurisdictions.
Would you say in general there's been significant progress since 2017?
Significant progress in?
On interties?
No.
So the government hasn't done anything.
I wouldn't say significant progress.
Significant on the recommendations. Got it. So I just would also just invite comments on you to expand on the importance of baseload power, on the importance of natural gas, and on if you want to share any thoughts around the net zero by 2035 conditionality of the CERs. And I guess I just would ask all of you, like, what would you anticipate would actually happen to emissions in the electricity sector without the CERs?
You'll have to save those answers for the next round as time's up. Thank you. Ms. Stubbs, we'll now go to Mr. Bruson for 6 minutes.
Yeah, please.
With Mr. Gorman from the Canadian Nuclear Association, I come from a province that switched off coal for cleaner electricity, and nuclear was an important part of that transition. So when we're talking about clean power and baseload power, I've seen in my own home province the importance of nuclear. I was wondering if you believe that nuclear, along with other renewables, can be an affordable and reliable source of energy for our country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruson, for the question. And you're up, if I may say, firstly, just to reflect on the remarkable decarbonization of Ontario's electricity grids. When we closed down those coal-fired plants, it was nuclear that was responsible for replacing 89% of the electricity created by those plants with clean, non-emitting baseload power. It's a real asset to this country. Regarding the affordability of nuclear, I would point out that in the Ontario context, nuclear is the second lowest cost electricity in the province, next to water power, hydroelectricity. The refurbishments, $26 billion refurbishments of the plants in Ontario that has been underway now for 5 years and has another 5 years or so to go, is ahead of schedule and on budget, and will be delivering cost-competitive electricity as we have in this province well into the 2060s, and are a really important cornerstone for providing that clean baseload power that you speak of. And if I may, on the baseload question, Ms. Tribusson, I referenced in my remarks that we are going to require an extra 100 gigawatts of new baseload non-emitting power. And as a nation, we have to ask ourselves, where is that power going to come from? We've been blessed with water power for many decades, but now doubling or tripling the amount of electricity we have, ensuring that it's completely emissions-free, and getting that baseload power. We don't have the luxury or access to water power going forward, and nuclear is going to play a really important part.
All right, and if I may, a lot of the conversation I hear these days is about SMRs. There's a lot of conversation about what's that potential, and particularly in provinces that may not have had nuclear as much as part of their resources. I know that Canada's first commercial grid reactor, or an SMR reactor, is at Darlington with support from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Can you talk to me a little bit about what SMRs play in a role as far as a clean grid?
Yeah, on this incredible track record and history of nuclear that we have as a nation, which is really respected around the world, we have, and because of these refurbishments that have the industry firing on all cylinders right now, we have been able to do some remarkable innovations in the development of these new nuclear technologies, these small modular reactors, which are ultimately scalable They could be as small as something that fits on the back of an 18-wheeler and brought to a remote community or a mining site, for example, up to 300 megawatts, which is on the larger side. And to your point, Mr. Busen, about the Darlington site, those things are under construction right now. They will be generating electricity on the grid by 2028. But the one thing I think I would that differentiates some of these new small modular reactor technologies, in addition to being scalable and emissions-free, they produce very, very high temperature heat. And that high temperature heat can be used to replace fossil fuels in heavy industry operations that require high temperature heat. So they've got electricity capabilities, of course, scalable, but also to produce steel, cement, et cetera, or even hydrogen, or do all three at the same time.
Great. Thank you. In the remaining time, if I could go to Ms. Bellissimo, Canria, just to talk a little bit. We've been hearing some conversation about renewables. Are they able to meet our energy needs, but also are they affordable and reliable? So if you could please comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to. One of the ways people look at affordability is levelized costs. So I'll just give you a cost comparison from the Lazard study that was done in 2023. Solar photovoltaic dollars per megawatt hour ranges from 24 to 96. Wind ranges from 24 to 75. Nuclear ranges from 141 to 221. And natural gas combined cycle starts at $39 a megawatt hour and goes to 101. Electricity is a portfolio approach. When you want to deliver clean, reliable, affordable power, we need a mix. We're going to need everything. We have talked about it, and I did in my introductory remarks, how much electricity growth we're going to see. So it is a mix. The most affordable sources of new electricity supply in the world today are wind and solar. And batteries are dropping in cost very, very impressively. They've dropped to 10% of what they were 10 years ago. And it's getting better. So going forward, what we need to build reliable electricity grids all across Canada is diverse supply mixes that are complementary. And one of the areas that I think we get into some problems is we talk a lot about baseload power. What we need is flexible generation. We can get really affordable renewables on the system. We can supplement that with energy storage. And we need flexibility in our resources so that they can ramp and meet demands when we need to meet them. So, I think the way we talk about it is honestly a little bit backwards. Happy to answer more questions on this.
Time is up. Maybe you'll get some questions as we move along. I'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George. Thank you to our witnesses as well. I do have a quick question for the Canadian Association of Gas. I don't know if the Canadian Gas Association is aware that Mr. Derek Evans, who is the executive president of Batway, that Mr. Poilievre should rethink his position on the carbon tax. The deployment of clean energy requires a price on carbon. Are you in favor of a price on carbon?
So, Mr. Chairman, sorry, there we go. Mr. Chairman, I think the honourable member is referring to Mr. Evans' comments. Mr. Evans runs a Pathways Alliance. Pathways Alliance is an alliance of oil sands companies. He's not involved with the natural gas industry. So that's the first point. The second point.
Je comprends.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm just asking you this: if the people in the oil and gas sector are speaking positively about that, and they're not all against a price on carbon, why should it be different for the gas sector?
On a carbon tax as the Canadian Gas Association.
Donc, parfait, merci. Ni pour ni contre, ça vous laisse.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask each of our witnesses the same question. Are you in favor of a carbon tax, a price on carbon? This is something that's certainly going to come out of our study. Thank you very much, Mr. Simard.
That there's a fairly strong international consensus that carbon pricing is a very effective way of policy of guiding industries towards lower carbon futures. But I would also say that it's not the only mechanism that you can use to get there. What is important is sending that strong signal and having those guide barriers that point industry and their plans and their investments and their developments in the right direction.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
From our perspective, much like Mr. Egan, we don't have a firm position with respect to specific pricing instruments. What we want, and what I think most people want, is a certainty from an investment standpoint.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. For ATCO, we've been familiar with the provincial specified gas emitter regulations since 2007, and the carbon tax and industrial can be very helpful in terms of incenting certain behaviors, but there are other ways of doing it. But I think it's that certainty and consistency so that businesses can make the type of decisions they need to move forward. Thank you.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you.
Electric Federation Canada, we don't have a firm policy on carbon tax. However, we do feel that it is an effective measure to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We do have a lot of manufacturing capacity within Canada amongst our membership, so they are also concerned with competitiveness and cost. So the steady policy signals and the timelines are important when implementing these types of measures.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I have a question specifically for you, the Electro Federation. Mr. Normand Mouchot from the Trottier Institute appeared and said that we would have to stop thinking about federal programs that are only for major businesses, for major corporations. We have to try to find help for small and medium-sized businesses. The industries you represent, can they not play a role in that area?
I'm not sure I understand the question. When you
Oui, les programmes.
Yes, I'm speaking about federal programs. The carbon pricing by the federal government. There is a tax credit for clean electricity, clean energy. That is for major corporations at the moment, and perhaps that's not the best solution. Small and medium-sized businesses could benefit from the same type of thing. Since you are representing companies that are in favor of the electrification of the grid, would you be able to do something to help small and medium-sized businesses in this way?
So when it comes to the investment tax credits, where we're coming from is the ability to have those credits for the manufacturing of the grid equipment, which is currently not included in the ITC system today. And many of those grid equipment suppliers are in Canada, and they would not be considered to be those mega organizations that you're talking about. They are more medium-sized organizations, but playing a role in the forefront when it comes to the energy transition.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I just want to give a reminder for everyone when we speak into the mics, we don't need to lean too close to them because it does impact interpretation. So you can keep a bit of distance. Yeah. Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for providing your expert advice on a very complex set of issues that we're confronting. I will use my 6 minutes to move my notice of motion that I gave to my committee colleagues on May 8th, 2024, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study into the TMX pipeline to determine how, like as in the case of our ArriveCan app, the cost to taxpayers spiraled out of control, to get clarity on plans to divest and sell off the now completed pipeline and the implications of such a sale to Canadian taxpayers, and examine how such increases in export capacity will impact on a future cap on GHG emissions, and that the committee invite the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Natural Resources, as well as experts in the economy and the environment, to provide testimony, and the committee hold no fewer than 5 meetings for that purpose, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to the Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report. I move this motion, Chair, because of my growing frustration, having come into this Parliament really believing that we had a moment, a rare moment, to confront the two unprecedented crises of our age, a crisis facing our species and our planet in terms of climate catastrophe, while also trying to find a means to maintain the incredible standard of quality of living and jobs and sustainability that our communities have depended on. And I had really thought that this was going to be a moment, and I'd heard the Prime Minister's speech at Paris, and that Canada, with our incredible natural resources and our talent, would lead the way. But I haven't seen that. We've heard our witnesses talk about they're still waiting on the ITCs. We saw the Biden administration bring an all-of-government approach. We see investment moving there. But all through this, the TMX pipeline moved ahead. The government never blinked once. Our latest greenhouse gas emissions show that, once again, oil and gas emissions continue to rise. They've risen every single year since 2006. The energy and Alberta emissions now account for 38% of total emissions in Canada. So this is an issue that's not going away. This is coming as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres just recently said that we are at a make or break moment for our planet. He said today's humanity spews out over 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year, and at this rate the planet will soon be pushed past the 1.5 degree limit. That, of course, is the red line that we've been warned about by scientists again and again. Another UN report in 2022 warned that countries' carbon-cutting pledges were too weak. And as of that moment, there was, quote, no credible pathway to maintaining 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we've certainly seen the last 11 months have been the hottest on record. And Secretary General Guterres did call out the politicians who promised and made commitments on lowering emissions while failing and ignoring that, which brings me to my concern about the TMX pipeline. There was no business case for this pipeline. There was no company willing to do this. The International Energy Agency has written report after report warning governments against locking into long-term infrastructure because of the changing market. But what we saw that this government decided to do was that they were going to lock Canada in for bitumen processing in the long term, no matter what it meant for the economy, no matter what it meant for changing global markets, and no matter what it meant for the environment and the crisis that we're facing. We've seen, as a result of the news on TMX, that oil production in Alberta has jumped based on the knowledge that 900,000 extra barrels a day will create a major opportunity for the Pathways Alliance. Now, this is a group of companies that have never, ever lowered emissions, and we give them all kinds of tax breaks. We've given them all kinds of gifts, and now we've given them $34 billion in taxpayers' money. There has to be accountability for that. There has to be accountability for how that much money was spent on a pipeline that should have cost, what, $5 or $6 billion? Why did we have to pay that amount of money, and why is that being given to an industry that made $48 billion in profits in 2 years while they continue to ignore their emissions obligations? And in fact, Derek Evans, the new head of Pathways Alliance, is now saying he's questioning, after all this gift we've given them, why they should be forced to meet any future emissions cap. Maybe they'd do it in 2050, but not before then. So we have to address this as well, because We saw the Prime Minister go to the international stage with the Environment Minister, and claim that they were going to put an emissions cap on. You can't put an emissions cap on if you're going to massively increase production. That's like saying you're going to drink your way to sobriety. Everybody knew they were making that up. Everybody knew Mr. Trudeau had no intention of it. And yet $34 billion later, we are stuck now with massive increases in GHG emissions when we've been told again and again by the world scientific community that we're at peak carbon. $34 billion could have been spent on a whole manner of elements to transform, to create a clean energy, to create alternatives, but that wasn't the choice. So we need to have explanations for that. And what really concerns me, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, and I think my colleagues, I offer them their thoughts on it, is that since there wasn't a business case, and since this blew the budget so badly, there is no way any company can use TMX unless it's massively subsidized. Because the toll costs on the bitumen that you have to run down that pipeline would be too high to make it worthwhile. The CER, the energy regulator, had estimated that 78% of the cost of every barrel will have to be paid for. By who? Is it going to be by the public? Is that what we're being told? Or will this be the great reconciliation project of the Trudeau government where they're going to give the pipeline to some group? Now, they may call that reconciliation. I call that pork barrel. I want to know who's getting that pipeline. I want to know whoever buys that pipeline, are they going to pay the taxpayers back $34 billion? Or is this going to be a group of friends who get that pipeline at a massive subsidy? We need to know. So this is, to me, is the priority that our committee has to address. Because if we don't address how this pipeline is going to operate, there's going to be an agreement, maybe this summer, maybe in the fall, and suddenly $34 billion of infrastructure is going to be given to some group, and there'll be a big press conference, and everyone will slap each other on the back, and the taxpayers will be left as a sucker, and the planet will be paying the cost. We need to hear, what is the plan? If they're going to massively increase production, where is this emissions cap? Or is that just another bogus promise while Canada continued to ignore its obligations? And I will refer, Mr. Chair, to our Environment Commissioner, who's warned us again and again and again that this government has missed every single climate target they promised. He said after 30 years, the trend in Canada's greenhouse gas emissions that create the harmful climate impacts is going up. He said Canada was once a leader in the fight against climate change. However, after a series of missed opportunities, it has become the worst performer of all the group of G7 nations since the landmark Paris Agreement on Climate Change was adopted in 2015. And he said, we can't continue to go from failure to failure. We need action and results, not just more targets and plans. So for that, Mr. Chair, I'm willing to talk with my colleagues about this, but I think that we have to make it a priority to get a sense of what is happening with the TMX, why these decisions were made, and what is the plan to have an emissions cap when we're going to massively increase production of the highest level of GHG emissions, carbon producing on the planet.
Mr. Angus, we now have a motion on the floor, and for our witnesses, as we have a motion on the floor, we have a speaking order we'll be going through. We do have time till 5:30, and so if we are done with this, we'll get back to questioning. I just ask everybody to be patient as we go through this process. I'll now go to Mr. Patzer.
Well, thank you very much. I do find it quite fascinating that, we get a motion like this. I mean, of course, Conservatives would love to know how on earth the government managed to spend that much money on this project as well, especially when the private sector was fully willing and able to build this for significantly less. And it was the fact that the government chased them off and basically had to buy the pipeline because they were busy speaking out of both sides of their mouth when it came to this. So I think it's important to have that on the record. I hope that this would maybe be a starting point of the NDP voting against the government because, as of now, they continue to support and prop up the government, allow them to get away with things like this.
Point of order. I was hoping that this be a
Mr.
moment
Patzer,
where the
we have a point of order
would support the NDP.
Okay, well, I think that's not a point of order. That's a point of debate. So you can use that during your debate. Anyways, Mr. Patzer, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. But I mean, that would actually truly be where putting actions to where words are, right? So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, we definitely welcome this study. Yeah, it is a gross amount of taxpayers' dollars that was spent on a project, like I was saying, that the private sector was fully willing to build. But it's the constant moving of goalposts that make it impossible. We've just heard witnesses today talk about certainty for investors, that is what the number one concern is. And that was a big reason why the private proponent got out from this project, because there was no certainty. And we've heard that in many other projects that have been canceled and delayed when it comes to resource development in this country. And it's over, again, the moving of goalposts, uncertainty, death by delay that we continue to see over and over and over and over again by the current government. So, yeah, definitely welcome this study. And I think, yeah, clarity around how this would work would be great to see. I'll maybe just defer to my colleague, Ms. Stubbs, now for her thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. We'll now go to Ms. Stubbs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I do want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I will offer support for this motion from our colleague. And I guess, though, before I get into this topic around TMX, I would just say that I will end up offering a friendly amendment to our colleague Charlie to have this study supersede all the current work of the committee for this reason, because clearly, there is still a lack of certainty and clarity on the government's requirements for it urging proponents to meet its goals on electricity decarbonization, even though, as you have all outlined numerous times, that Canada's grid is already almost 90% clean. And I think that if you had a chance to answer, you probably would have said that your proponents and your workers would have continued on that innovation, that even without the CERs, you probably would have hit 90% very rapidly. I'm going to take a gamble that might have been your answer. Certainly welcome to expand on that in your written submissions. But I would just say to all colleagues here, the reason that Charlie's motion must supersede our existing work is because this government has promised ITCs for a year and a half and has not delivered. Because those ITCs have been deployed in the United States for 3 years. Because this federal government has talked a big game about caring about Canadian businesses, Canadian workers, Canadian taxpayers, and really said they want to compete with the United States. And of course, every single Canadian here knows that we cannot compete with the United States in a dollar-for-dollar subsidy race to the bottom of the barrel because it is not affordable. But what we can do is compete in every possible way that we can control our domestic policy, regulatory, and fiscal agenda. That means actually working with the private sector to establish realistic targets on realistic timelines that are affordable, that are economic, that are possible with current technology. It means caring about where the generation comes from and the supply chains of materials. It means thinking about Canadian energy security, affordability, reliability. It means contemplating national security on energy security. It means not putting the cart before the horse, which this government has clearly done, when it actually hasn't figured out how to, as all of you have called for in different ways, accelerate the generation of the recovery of resources that require them to meet their end game, and where that's all going to come from. We must contemplate that this work should be done by Canadian businesses, Canadian workers with Canadian technology and Canadian supply chains, Canadian products to protect Canadian security, to pursue energy security with North American partners and free and democratic allies around the world. This is what's also clear. There is no federal regulatory process right now, right? The cornerstone regulatory framework and initiative by this government was declared unconstitutional, largely unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of Canada 6 months ago, and they've done nothing. They've done nothing while the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister now talks a big game about how this summer she's going to suddenly accelerate major project approvals and back the private sector and other proponents to get things built. Well, 10 years of their actual track record and results shows that that's all false. And so we're actually sitting here with private sector proponents and developers asking for clarity and certainty on fiscal and regulatory regimes. And right now, it is completely broken. There is no certainty or clarity at all. That's a direct result of this Liberal government, but also in participation from NDP and Bloc anti-energy activists who got us here. But I'll digress on that, and I don't want to undermine the spirit of cooperation here with my colleague Charlie. What's actually at issue here is a federal government that pancakes and layers on anti-competitive policies, taxes, targets, and timelines that are detrimental to Canadians, to our standard of life, that undermine the potential for reliable, affordable, accessible fuel and power that are the absolute essentials to our everyday lives in this big, cold, developed, proud country, isn't it? So I am going to hope that our colleague will accept a friendly amendment to ensure that his motion will supersede all of the current work of this study, of this committee. And I hope that it will buy a little bit of time, although it's urgent, for the Liberals to actually listen to what the people here who generate, distribute, and provide on the front lines to Canadians who need their power, who need their services, who need their products and need their technologies. I hope this government will actually listen to what these candid truth tellers to policy and to power are saying about the grave risks to continuing going down this agenda that this government is imposing, even though it's also still fraught with a lack of certainty and clarity. And none of us should be participating in the charade of pretending that it isn't. Now to the point that my colleague has made. Conservatives, of course, opposed the purchase, the government purchase, by which we mean taxpayers' purchase, of the Trans Mountain expansion. There was a business case. Kinder Morgan believed there was a business case. The former federal Conservative government approved the Trans Mountain expansion. When this government came to office for political purposes and ideology only, they outright froze the regulatory process of all existing major resource and energy infrastructure and project applications. That was the beginning of driving out investment, of killing 300,000 oil and gas workers' jobs, of starting what is actually the consequences of a decade of these guys, of Canadian investment soaring in the U.S. and foreign and American investment collapsing in Canada, but what's worst of all, of Canadian investment collapsing in Canada. Because the collusion between big government and rent-seeking oligopolies always rips off taxpayers and always undermines the public interest. But our job here at this table is to protect it and to fight for it. So the truth is, of course, that there was a business case, because a private sector proponent wouldn't have spent hundreds of millions of dollars going through a regulatory process, after which it did get an approval to go ahead and build its interprovincial pipeline, which was in federal jurisdiction. But what happened was these guys came in, they froze the regulatory process all the time, writ large, and then they delayed and delayed and delayed, and then forced Kinder Morgan to go through another process that they made up on the fly, because, again, they actually didn't get C-69 out the door until years later, and then started applying new conditions, a new review, an entire new bureaucratic process to this private sector proponent in the project that already had been approved. Then they gave it the green stamp, the green light. Then what happened? Well, then the court ruled almost exactly the same thing that they had ruled in Northern Gateway, that the Liberals failed in their Indigenous consultation because they, as many governments have done, failed to have a decision maker at the table and couldn't demonstrate that there was viable two-way back and forth consultation and accommodations between the parties. Let's just be clear here. None of that ever had to be delayed. The proponent already had the green light. The proponent already went through the most rigorous scientific, evidence-based regulatory process by world-class experts, which is, by the way, Canada's track record, the reality of Canadian energy development in this country, in this world. They already got the green light. That's the problem. That is what started the flood and the cancellation and this charade that the Prime Minister perpetuates, that there isn't a business case for Canadian oil sands or Canadian natural gas or exports of LNG. Even though, clearly the private sector proponents think there's a case, and also news to the Prime Minister, so do world allies around the world who are begging for Canadian resources and technologies, which would actually, by the way, help lower global emissions. So moving forward, then what happened was anti-energy politicians, public policymakers, and activists took on every possible tool they could to kill that approved pipeline, to be obstructionist, to stop them at every step, to keep it from getting built. What we found out in the process is that the federal government itself gave tax dollars to anti-energy protest groups to say, block TMX and shut it down. That's the truth. So this whole language around there isn't a business case, nobody wants to do this. No, this is the consequences of a government that has an agenda to actually expand and exert economic, command and control economic agenda, to pick winners and force losers, because that's what always happens when politicians and bureaucrats get involved in this kind of thing. The loss and the consequences are a travesty, a generational travesty for our country, a failure of Canada to stand with our allies, a failure after 10 years of securing Canadian energy self-sufficiency and energy security, a skyrocketing cost of living crisis that has been caused by this big government corporate oligopoly agenda. What Conservatives said was this: the federal government needs to declare the Trans Mountain expansion in the general advantage of Canada. That would allow the federal government to, A, assert federal jurisdiction, which that project was with federal approval. We said immediately that the government had to immediately and urgently get Indigenous consultation right. They delayed, by the way, for 6 months before they even started it again. That's actually linked to the unilateral veto of the Northern Gateway pipeline that the Prime Minister made, again, for votes in BC, not based on science or evidence. He unilaterally reversed the approval of Northern Gateway, the only standalone private sector proposed export pipeline to a deep water port with a fast track to Asia, obviously that the former Conservative government had approved. The Northern Gateway wasn't just abandoned. The Prime Minister Trudeau had the option from that court decision, just like he took in TMX, to redo the Indigenous consultation, get it right. We would have had a fully functioning dedicated export pipeline operating. If that had happened efficiently, the private sector would have built it on their tab. That would have given generational and permanent benefits to Canada. We said that what the government had to do was assert federal jurisdiction, enforce the rule of law, uphold the successive court injunctions that were very reasonable. Just, Conservatives believe every Canadian has a right to protest, to demonstrate, to speak up, to speak out, and of course also on energy projects too. The court injunctions were very reasonable. They were like, stay 100 feet from the entrance, don't block the workers because this is a safety issue, yada, yada, yada. But we all watched in slow motion as these activists and politicians colluded to weaponize their bylaws, to undermine the concept of federal jurisdiction, to question the legitimacy of the approval and of this crucial energy infrastructure, and a government that deliberately dithered, delayed, and then finally, I guess, because exactly as my colleague MP Patzer has said, the truth is they've been talking out of both sides of their mouths the entire time, and what a tangled web we surely do weave when we first deceive. How, and this is the worst part, we're all sitting around here like, ooh, it's shocking that now the tab is $34 billion when the private sector had a plan for $7.4 billion, would have been operational in 2019 on TMX. How has this happened? Well, this is what happens when governments get involved. Like, how on earth is that even a question? This happened because the government would not back their own decision, cause delays, uncertainty, chaos, funded opponents to the project they approved while pretending they didn't. This is a very deliberate agenda. It all comes from an actually anti-energy and anti-capitalist ideology. There is not a single reason why this government had to purchase TMX. All this government had to do was actually stand by the approval, assert federal jurisdiction, get that Indigenous consultation right, which they should have remedied by doing it in Northern Gateway, but they lost that opportunity. They should have been prepared to back Canada's reputation and our world-class regulatory expertise. They should have been prepared to back the private sector proponent after they gave them approval. They should have used every tool in their toolbox to open the path for the private sector to pay the bills, to make their investment, and to build their major project that would benefit all of Canada for generations to come, show Canada to be reliable with its allies, get better prices for Canadians. All the ways in which we all know, or I guess maybe only conservatives know, that energy infrastructure, energy transportation is absolutely critical and it is absolutely critical to the everyday standard of living, quality of life of Canadians, and underpins the entire economy. So since the regulatory and fiscal approach of this government to the unrealistic targets and timelines they are trying to force on electricity generators, distributors, and providers, given that they have failed, they have promised and failed to implement the ITCs, given that they're still going back and forth on what the final versions of the CERs might look like, given the asinine exclusions of small and medium-sized Canadian builders and entrepreneurs and providers, given all actually the insane exclusions that has anything to do with energy development, oil and gas, from any of their programs that they claim to all be about innovation and technology, which actually is just all about taxpayers' dollars disappearing into the ether, instead of enabling and opening the road for the private sector proponents and experts and innovators and risk takers and entrepreneurs to actually be able to do the work that has built this country. Since after 9 long, excruciating, painful, harmful years, certainly for the people that I represent, and every Canadian whose livelihood, standard of living, and affordability depends on resource development in Canada, I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I hope they will be able to come back. I hope they will give extensive written submissions. I hope we can pull this out of the fire for the best interest of all of Canada. But this is why I will be supporting our colleague Charlie's motion. I would just offer, if he would accept it, a friendly amendment to insert the words that this study occur as soon as possible and supersede all other work of the committee, because we agree entirely that and actually, Charlie, thank you for finally telling the truth and admitting that not you. I mean, I know that you've always known it, so I just thank you, because it's these guys that are, talking with fork of tongue. Thank you for actually telling the truth, which is that the emissions cap is designed to be a production cap, which is designed to put Canadian energy businesses and workers out of jobs, which is intentionally designed to kill their development, their businesses, which is intentionally designed to unemploy the people, certainly that I represent in Northern Alberta, certainly that my colleague represents in Saskatchewan, and certainly the people that my colleague here from New Brunswick, because Atlantic Canadians, as you know, have worked with Albertans throughout our country to build our respective provinces to the benefit of this entire country. And if only this government would get out of their gatekeeping way and actually let Canada take the global critical minerals, LNG, oil and gas and natural gas leadership, oil of all kinds, and natural gas leadership role that we should be taking in this world. I think it is more important than ever that we have this discussion about how to reverse this poisonous, wrong-headed, big government, big company colluding agenda, get back to a place where a regulatory and fiscal regime actually attracts investment and enables private sector proponents to do the work on which they are experts, to be realistic about timelines, targets, and to deliver actual outcomes and objectives, not a bunch of rhetoric and virtue signaling baloney. Conservatives oppose the emissions cap because we know it is a cap on production and designed to put oil and gas workers and businesses out of work.
Ms. Stubbs,
So
I'll
I
ask you to just hold for a
So
sec.
thank
We
you for
do
telling
have
the
a
truth on that. We'll support your motion.
we do have a point of order. I think you're done,
I was just
but we
trying
have
to
a point of order.
clarify because she was reading what she was going to add to it, but then I wasn't sure how much was being added out of that conversation. Because
So-
I had to decide whether I'm going to support all of it. I'm not. I've been pretty reasonable here, but I did hear that this study occur as soon as possible. I was trying to write it and supersede all other work of the committee, and so does.
So
is that the end of it, or did you have all the other stuff as well? Could you tell us where you'd put that in?
I think Mr. Angus is asking for clarification on what your amendment was, and we have other speakers on the list. So if you want to provide that clarification,
Chair, thank you. I can hear him.
Yeah.
Also, fair point to my colleague trying to intervene on what exactly I'm trying to accomplish here instead of my, my evidence-based tirade. So what I am suggesting to the member that we include is after the word "and," following his point about the emissions cap, we would wonder if he would accept the insertion of the sentence that this study occur as soon as possible and supersede all other work of the committee.
Point of order.
And we agree entirely that the objective, at least at the back end of this, must be to make taxpayers whole.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Go ahead, Mr. McKinnon, on a point of order.
I believe the proper procedure would be for Ms. Stubbs to move a sub-amendment, and then we can vote on that. There is really no such thing as formally as a friendly amendment.
Yeah, so I do have a speaking. Thank you for your point of order. And just for clarification, that is an amendment being proposed because we don't have friendlies. So on that, I think you have a point of order, Mr. Angus?
Yeah, so for the sub-amendment, I'm writing it down here. So it says, examine how such increases in export capacity will impact on a future cap of GHG emissions and that this study occur as soon as...
the clerk has sent it out to everybody. Just so if you want to take...
Imagine me trying to do the work of the clerk, and the clerk is so...
That's why we have the clerk, and he sent it out to everybody so it's clear, so you can take a look at it on your devices. I am going to continue down the speaking order that's been established, so I'm going to go to Mr. Bruson.
Oh, well, I could say more, but...
Mr. Bruson, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Like the way this agenda also undermines
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has been enlightening. Listening to this quite interesting bedfellows for this study so far in the conversation. Look, I'm not opposed to proceeding with this study, but what I find really interesting when we have studies is that we have the chance to hear from witnesses. That's what it's about, and I would really hope I will have some amendments as well that I would be proposing. I can't do that while we're discussing a sub-amendment, but
We have a point of order by Ms. Tubbs. Ms. Tubbs, on the point of order.
Well, hopefully, the parliamentary secretary will support inviting the witnesses back. But I might also just add a hot tip here, which is that hopefully you're talking to them and don't need committee to wrestle through some of these issues.
So, not a point of order. I mean, that's debate. But I'll go back to Mr. Bruson.
I afforded the respect to sit and listen, and so I'm just not going to take very much time. What I was saying was shortly that I'm looking forward to being able to hear witnesses to this motion, the study that would come from this motion. But what I would say is that I am going to be proposing amendments following this. What I would hope in the remaining half hour is that we would be able to go back to asking questions from our witnesses who we have here. When we're talking about emissions reductions, electricity is a big piece of what we have to do to get there. And what I would say is that, just to be clear, emissions right now in Canada are at the lowest they've been in 3 decades, other than the COVID years. The only target that we've actually had to face is an interim target in 2026. We're on track to meet that with what you see with the interim report that we submitted to the IPCC. But electricity, clean electricity regulations, what these people here at the table are working on is going to be a very big piece of what we're going to need to do to get to those targets that we're going to meet. And so I would say that, can we please just park this discussion on this motion, give the last half hour back to the witnesses to hear. And I will also point out that for the Conservatives, if they're interested in the amendments to the IAA, that was a whole bunch of the conversation that have been up. It's in the Budget Implementation Act that you can find those amendments. So we can talk about that when we're debating. But what I would just
Mr. Bruson, we have a point of order. Can you just hold right there?
So interesting, right? Because I listened.
So point of order, but point of order.
Yeah, I mean, of course, just to clarify, that means they're not done.
Okay, so once again, that's debate, not a point of order. Let's use, folks, just a reminder, point of orders for procedural. If you want to debate, I'll put you on the list. Feel free to debate. We'll go back to you, Mr. Bruson.
Just as a matter of respect to the people we have here at the table, we can set aside time to talk about this motion, and I would like that. Like I said, I am also going to have some amendments to propose that we can talk about. That's going to take time. We're going to run out the last half hour. These people have traveled. They're here. Can we please go back to the witnesses and discuss this motion at a later moment?
Point of order. So is that a motion to adjourn debate?
I'll go back to Mr. Bruson. Mr. Bruson, is that a motion to adjourn debate, or is that?
Yes, I would propose that we adjourn debate so that we can hear the witnesses.
So, Mr. Bruson has indicated there that you'd like to adjourn debate on this. So, go ahead, call the roll.
MP De Bruson,
Yes.
MP Gahir,
In favor?
Madame Lapointe,
Oui.
Mr. McKinnon,
Yes.
Mr. Schiefke,
Oui.
Mr. Dreeshen, Mr. Moore,
No.
Mr. Patzer,
No.
Ms. Stubbs, Mr. Simard, Mr. Angus.
No.
Mr. Chair, if I...
6 nays.
Okay, so that did not pass. So, Mr. Bruson?
May we at least release the witnesses then? I don't see how we're going to get through this in time for them to finish, just to let them go.
Ms. De Bruson has suggested we release the witnesses. Do we have, yeah, I see nodding heads, yes? Okay, so we have unanimous consent to release the witnesses. Thank you so much for coming today and providing your testimony. I will say that you can provide written briefs to the clerk on if there's anything else or questions that you were asked, you want to go into a bit more detail, please proceed to do so. And thank you once again. Okay, so we will go back to the speaking order that was established. Mr. Bruson, I'm going to go to the next speaker, and that's Monsieur Simard.
Sub-amendment, though, now?
We are on the sub-amendment. Yeah, on the amendment, correct. What?
I was just going to weigh in on that. Amendment, we haven't got to a sub-amendment yet.
Correct. So we have the main motion. We have an amendment that's proposed by Ms. Stubbs, which everybody's received in your inboxes, so you should have that. And then we are proceeding to the next speaker, which is Monsieur Simard. But I see, do you have a point of order? Do you want to get on the speaking list? Okay. So I'll put you on the speaking list. Monsieur Simard, go ahead.
Merci, Georges.
Thank you very much, George. I'm certainly going to support Charlie's motion, and I will also support Shannon's amendment. I have already tabled a much similar motion, maybe about a year ago, and I think that we find ourselves, though all in agreement for diametrically opposed reasons, very different from that time. This synergy, this anti-capitalistic position. I am not anti-energy. I am not anti-capitalist. But what the government, the federal government, is doing with Trans Mountain is anything but consistent. I believe that we have to study this question very closely, and I find it a little bit surprising that my Conservative friends have supported this motion. When I got here in the House of Commons in 2019, I heard my colleagues, my Conservative colleagues, shouting, "Build the pipeline. I love oil and gas." And now we're studying electricity today. I am very proud of Hydro-Quebec, but I'm not here I'm not here to say that I'm ready to wear a badge that says I love electricity or let's build hydroelectric pylons. So I am in favor of looking at the issue of the pipeline. And I would point out that in 2020, before our election campaign, in 2020, that it was valued at $17 billion. That came from the federal government. One project, $17 billion. Well, to my mind, really, you have to wonder what Canada is doing when it comes to fossil fuels. If you look at the budget, it is now $83 billion that will be funneled to the oil and gas energy. These gluttons of public money who year after year benefit from this type of thing, make reports, and are able to get rich at the expense of the Canadian people, of the population of this country. I've heard people say here around the table, people are having trouble eating, finding housing, clothing themselves. But these gluttons of energy after the pandemic are even getting richer at the expense of the most vulnerable here. Charlie, my friend Charlie, I don't know, the French version might be a little bit clumsy in the way it is drafted in its reference to Arrive Can, but I will support it, and I thank Shannon for her amendment, and we will vote on the amendment that was moved by Shannon, and I would have a sub-amendment that may well be moved shortly about inviting the Minister of Finance. I think we should also add to the list of witnesses the PBO, hear what he has to say about it, because he is the one who revealed the truth. He undid the myth that the profits arising from the pipeline would be reinvested in clean energy. But what the PBO told us was that it doesn't exist, and they won't exist. You can't invest something that doesn't exist in clean energy. That's something that is very difficult to do, is it not? So I don't see how it can happen. And I also think that we should invite the PBO to come here to discuss the Trans Mountain Pipeline, but also to discuss his report and give us any other relevant information that he may have for us. I agree with Charlie. Capping emissions is another matter. How do we do that when you try to increase production? It is inconsistent. You try to cap your GHGs, but you want to increase your production. Let's call things the way they are and see things as they are. It is not something that is possible. There is, Charlie, it's as you said, it's almost like somebody who drinks themselves sober. As we say in Quebec, there's no diet poutine, so don't fool yourself. Don't fool yourself that you would be able to reduce GHGs and move up production. So for all the reasons I have just expressed, I support Charlie's motion, Shannon's amendment, and we've had a study some 2 years now about this. I myself want to move a sub-amendment that the Parliamentary Budget Officer appear at the same time.
Just for procedural, Mr. Smart, we have an amendment. So if your sub-amendment goes to amend the amendment, we can place that. But if it does not specifically deal with the amendment, once we deal with the amendment, we'll have to place an amendment at that time as an amendment. So is that clear? Just want to make sure procedurally that once we deal with this amendment, it's off the table, you can place your amendment and we can have that conversation.
C'est ce que je vous disais.
Yes, I understand. So afterwards, I will move my amendment regarding inviting the PBO here.
Okay, so that's clear. So just to make, we had a motion moved by Mr. Angus, and we have an amendment now on the floor brought forward by Ms. Stubbs. And so we have a speaking order on that. And Mr. Patzer, you are next on the speaking order on the amendment to the main.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think kind of to the points that Mario was making, yeah, we can think of a lot of things that $34 billion could have done for Canadians besides subsidizing a pipeline that could have, should have, and would have been built by the private sector, right? There's a proponent that was going to do it. They had the business case ready to go. So, yeah, I mean, I think we agree on that point. I think for us, the angle here as well is, imagine if this was all about eliminating hydropower from Quebec, right? Or from Manitoba or from BC or from Newfoundland, right? Like that would not go over very well, right? I think everyone at this table agrees that hydropower is a good thing, right? That is a strategic advantage for Quebec that they have hydropower. They've got a great resource there. It's a good thing. We utilize it in Saskatchewan, not nearly as much because we don't have as much suitable terrain to be able to do it. We have the two big rivers, and we've utilized it a little bit, but we're quite limited in what we can do with that. resource going forward. Now we also know the exorbitant costs and timelines it takes to build new projects like that. So that's another reason why our province, for example, wouldn't be looking to expand on hydro. But I mean, to put into context, we wouldn't ever suggest we eliminate another province's main resource, and that's part of what happens here when we start talking about emissions caps and things like that, right? This is talking about eliminating a very precious resource and commodity that we have in our provinces that we extract and use in the highest standards possible, right, around the world. Methane reductions have happened quite rapidly in Saskatchewan. They're continuing to do more on it because they do want to have more reductions in methane gases, right? If other countries, even if the United States adopted our flare gas regulations, American emissions would drop drastically, right? We've got tighter regulations on that. The rest of the world adopted, even just our regulations on our production, global GHGs would drop dramatically, right? So that's part of the story that we're trying to tell here, is that we have great standards. We have what the world should be doing, but they're not, right? Let's tell that story. Let's tell the story, because if this is truly about global emissions, let's do what we can to help other countries reduce theirs, which is adopt our regulations that we do have, right? There are certain regulations that are pancaked and aren't necessary, and that's part of the discussion as well. But I do think the main point here is that we have such high standards in this country already. So, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater here, per se. So, yeah, I think this is a good amendment here, and I definitely think that the people that we represent would love to see this study happen, because again, people are concerned about the complete lack of fiscal, financial, monetary policy. Pick whichever word you want. It applies to this government. I know they're two separate things, but it applies either way, right? And people are concerned about that. And when they see $34 billion being spent on something that did not need to be spent on, people are concerned, right? And they see what this money could have been used for, what it should have been used for, and definitely makes people upset. So we're definitely happy to do this study, and I really like my colleague's amendment here. And as we said, we will support. Obviously, we're going to support Shannon's amendment, but we're going to support Charlie's motion as well. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. We'll now go to Mr. Bruson on the amendment.
Thank you. Look, just to make it a bit easier for everyone to have a sense of where my amendments are likely to go, I'm not going to be tabling them right now. Obviously, I can't while we're discussing this amendment, but as we're closing out to the end, I think it's important that we have a bit of context of what I'll be looking at. And so one of the things that I would be looking to add to this motion would be that it also examines the impacts to Canada's economy, and that we also include an invitation to communities after taxpayers. Again, I'm not moving these. I just think that it's important as we're having this conversation that people see where it's going. So I think communities should be part of this conversation. I would also suggest that rather than signaling out Minister of Finance or Minister of Natural Resources, we replace it with relevant minister. But, we can have our conversation about that. And like I said, we're not debating that piece. I do think it's going to be a hard piece, I think, that we had witnesses here. We were in the middle of a study to just stop it for there's no particular reason why we would stop the study that we've already embarked on to do this. So to me, it seems like we are at a point where we should be continuing with what we've been at, which is to continue this study. We don't have a whole long, heavy road to do, and to be honest, this study is really important when we're talking about things like emissions, when we're talking about issues of affordability and reliability, all these issues that are so important. And then, frankly, I've been hearing members opposite talking about what is the impact on what their communities have seen, be it through, I believe that Ms. Stubbs mentioned brownouts that have happened in Alberta. What is going to be the impact working between provinces, and how do we bridge those changes? I think there's a lot there that we're going to need to be talking about that are really important to some of the baseline issues people have been talking about, even in the context of this motion. And so if we're talking about things like emissions reductions, if we are talking about what is happening as changes in the economy, if we're talking about things like regulatory frameworks and what are the regulatory frameworks, I believe that it makes most sense for us to continue with witnesses like what we had today, to hear about things like nuclear. I think that the example from Ontario of the transition that happened from coal-fired electricity to nuclear, in a large part, it was 60% of our power in Ontario, is a very important story for people to hear. I think that it shows us a lot of the pathways on how do we get to cleaner electricity. And you know, it's a story that not enough people know, quite frankly. Like, just seeing, you know, from my own experience, I don't think that people realize that was a huge change. And I tell this story often, but, you know, when I was working downtown, you'd look out of the building from my window and see this line of brown smudge over Lake Ontario. The number of smog days was about 55 smog days a year that we were having, and it was because we had coal-fired electricity. So, you know, an electricity study is so important, because how did we get from 55 smog days a year to 0 in Ontario? Is because we moved out of coal-fired electricity. We moved to cleaner energy. It's actually a big reason why, when we talk about 84% clean grid, that's because of what happened in Ontario. There was and I think that there should be a big shout out to what the Ontario government did to move us over to that cleaner grid. And that was done by doing exactly the kind of study that we're talking about doing right now, which is on the electrical grid. What do we need to make sure that we have a clean electrical grid going forward? So, to my mind, I think having these very witnesses that we are intending to call, the ones that we did have today, I mean, yeah, sure, bring them back. Bring them back. I would love to hear more from all of them, because they had some really great beginning presentations. And I think that when you hear them, you can see that they had what we had as a roadmap as to how do we do this? What's their insights that we should be looking at? And so, to my mind, there's no really good reason why we would upend the progress of this very important study to switch to something which actually there's nothing new happening at this point on it. Like, this is kind of a going backwards and looking, but it's not like, I mean, we're not going to be talking about anything that's going to be massive and urgent to change right now in the course of the study. I'm not opposed to doing the study. I haven't opposed the study. So I'm not, like, that's not the position I'm taking. I'm just saying, to my mind, it makes real sense for us to focus on something that's very urgent and that is necessary, and that is, let's continue with the study of how do we move to this cleaner electricity grid, because we know that the last 16% is going to be the hardest. I think that the witnesses are agreed on that. I think that we recognize that. We've done the easy stuff, and that's great. Like, that's a real tribute to Canada. We're seeing that it's bringing in investments. I speak with industries that talk about how they're investing in Canada because they actually, when they're looking at their own ESG models, they want to be able to point to the fact that it's a clean grid. That's a draw for them. So, great. And how do we get to the last 16%? And that is what these people here who we had before us, they would be able to give us more of the information that we need on that. So and they talked about the urgency. They actually all, I believe, talked about the need to make sure that the work is done quickly for the plans that they have, and for them to be able to contribute to the what we need to be able to, like I said, not have only just an affordable and reliable electricity grid, but also to make sure that we have a grid that is clean and responsive, and they want to play the role. And Mr. Angus was very clear about the fact that we need to be working towards a clean grid, apologize. And it was talking about the need to reduce emissions. Like, I really want to highlight, for me, because climate anxiety is real for lots of people, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that when we look at the fact that in the last inventory report that we submitted, Canadian emissions are down to the lowest they've been in 3 decades. If you pull out the COVID years are different. That is a tremendous success. That is a huge success. It's a lot of heavy lifting that's been happening. It's a lot of heavy lifting from people who will actually have to do the work to get it done. We have to work alongside them. We have to hear from them. There's really no point in having studies when we're not hearing from the witnesses that we've called. But this is showing that we're going in the right direction, and I can't highlight enough either, because I'll repeat it. I get frustrated when I hear people say, you haven't made any target. There hasn't been a target over the time of this government. It's a 2026 interim target. And the interim target, we're on track to meet. We're on track to meet the interim target. That's actually in the inventory report. So that's, but that doesn't mean the work's done. And I'll never be the one to say that the work is done. What I would say is, let's keep on getting to the point where we...
I'm having trouble hearing Mr. Brusen because of the commentary across the aisle.
Yeah, so...
On that point?
Okay, so point of order. I'll address your point of order, Mr. McKinnon. You have a point of order as well.
Well, just on that same point of order, I'm sitting right beside her, and I can hear Mr. Brusen perfectly fine as well.
Everybody...
And plus, we have a headpiece that I could easily be hearing as well, but I don't... Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer, on that, but everybody's got different hearing and audio abilities, and so I would just ask everybody to be respectful when folks are debating and whisper if you're having a side conversation. I think everybody can do that. Yeah, and just to make sure everybody can hear and participate. Thank you. Thank you for your point of order. Mr. Brusen?
I appreciate it. I appreciate that he's really interested in this study, being that he is new to this committee and that he's been really engaged in wanting to make sure that we continue on with the work that we're doing on the clean electrical grid. So thank you very much, Mr. McKinnon. So I think that the main piece that I would have to say is let's focus on what we do have to do to reduce emissions. This study is actually a central part of what we have to do. We've heard many issues that were raised by the people who were here. Unfortunately, we were unable to get through all of their testimony. Let's talk about, let's get this study done.
Mr. Bruce, we have a point of order by Mr. Dreeshen. Can you hold for 1 sec? Yes, Mr. Dreeshen.
It's the second time that Mr. Bruchen had mentioned this, and that is getting these specific witnesses back. So I'm just curious if the clerk had picked that up and if that would be something that the clerk and the chair would ensure.
So, thank you for that point of order. I know that's been mentioned by a few folks. I don't know where this is going to go, so I don't know if we'll ever have that conversation again regarding the study, but we'll cross that bridge, I guess, when we get there.
Thank you.
But thank you for reminding me. I'm mindful of time, but you do have the floor, Mr. Brusen, so we will be running against the clock here very quickly, and we do have others on the speaking list as well. So if you are finished, if you're not finished, keep going, but I will continue on next meeting with you speaking, and if you do end today, I will provide that same opportunity for somebody else. So go ahead. Sorry. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you. And so I recognize that we're running up to a deadline. But if we were just going to be saying, like as I was talking about, first of all, to going to Mr. Dreeshen's point, yes, I think that we should bring these people back. I think we should hear from all of them in more detail. It goes to my point. This study is important. Let's bring these witnesses back. And then we can actually do the heavy lifting that we need to do to get to our plans on how do we transition all of these forms of energy that they have in front of us. Like, how do we work to support them to do the heavy lifting that we need so that we can have that clean grid? It's going to be essential to what we need. They've said themselves double or triple the amount of electricity is going to be required. It's for many reasons, by the way. They pointed out it's because of data use, it's because of things like AI, it's because of the fact that we're changing how we, move our cars and vehicles, how we heat and cool our homes, all of those things. So let's make sure that we get that important piece in. and then we can go on to the next study. But I don't see any reason why we would disrupt what we're hearing right now, and stop the process as we're doing it. So that's basically where I am at. I'm not supportive of this amendment that's being proposed. I don't think that we need it. I am fine with going ahead with the study, but I would say that this amendment actually is just too disruptive to what we were hoping to do and that we had all agreed upon as a committee.
Okay, thank you. We do have others on the speaking list. You still have the floor, so we can continue, but we are running against the clock for today's
Is it
meeting.
possible just to vote on the sub-amendment so we actually get something done?
But we do have a speaking list, so we can't vote on the sub-amendment because we have a speaking list. If members want to take their names off the speaking list and they want to go right to a sub-amendment, sure. If not,
I'll take my name off.
okay. We do have Mr. Angus, and Mr. Patzer as well. Or we can move to. I mean, we can. Mr. Bruson has the floor, so I'll offer that. But we are at the end of time for the meeting today.
I would move that we adjourn. We're at the end of the meeting.
Okay, well, move to adjourn. Well, she's said move to adjourn, so we have to proceed with that.
Mr. Bruce?
No, but we never dealt with the motion.
Then I put my name back on the list.
That's fine.
Chair and Clerk, just wondering if you can confirm, I do believe that because we are still dealing with a motion that you can't actually adjourn, that you would have to suspend the meeting. These technicalities do matter. So I do think that the proper procedure in this moment would actually be to suspend the meeting, not to adjourn it.
Point of order.
Okay, so we are in the middle of a vote. Mr. Bruson said move to adjourn. We're in the middle of a vote. It's a dilatory motion. We have to proceed with that. So go ahead.
Mr. Gahir?
I don't think he can hear you.
Mr. Gahir?
Yes.
Madame Lapointe?
Oui.
Mr. McKinnon? Mr. Shifke?
Oui.
Mr. Dreeshen? Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. Patzer?
No.
Ms. Stubbs?
No.
Mr. Simard?
No.
Mr. Angus?
No.
5 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, so that did not pass.
Well, we didn't.
Est-ce qu'on peut proposer de suspendre?
Can we not suspend the meeting? Can we not move that we suspend the meeting, Mr. Chair?
We're out of time for resources. We can either try to request resources or suspend.
You can suggest to adjourn, but to resume debate on where we are.
Okay.
So either suspension or adjournment.
So we will, if we have consent, I'll ask for unanimous consent to suspend, and then we'll resume debate of where we ended off today with Mr. Dreeshen with the floor. Okay? Suspended.